All right. What truth about life do you wish you'd learned sooner?
Oh, good one. Being vulnerable is a position of strength, not weakness. Growing up and playing sports and kind of being groomed in that mentality, and certainly, my father implemented that. Uh, Always looked at that as, or maybe it was implied that it was weakness. You never want to let your guard down. You always want to be, the either the toughest physically or the toughest mentally in any given situation, because those are the people that are unscathed. I think I adopted that for a really long time, and then you start to become and show some vulnerability at the right times in the right situations. And that has a profound impact not only on your relationships with people that you work with regularly, but in your ability to lead, your ability to make decisions. I think it certainly ties into, emotional intelligence, which is kind of a buzzword, but I do think it's definitely real. So for me, it's certainly just being vulnerable, and not to a degree where it's, you're always vulnerable, but at the right time in the right situations, showing that in a boardroom, even though it might be frowned upon by executives in some aspects, depending on where their kind of corporate grooming's been. But having the courage to do that and just being authentic to being vulnerable. Every time I've done that, I have had built long-standing relationships with individuals that you may not be able to build because you have these walls up. And I've certainly been able to be a leader in a way that I never thought. I think it's totally underrated, and I don't think there's enough literature and enough people talking about vulnerability, because I think a lot of people relate to it in a way that no one wants to talk about.
Nice. Good answer.
What about you?
I'm going to say that everyone's faking it, that nobody's got it figured out. I think from a really young age, you think the adults know, you think, other people got it figured out, the cool kids got it figured out. And then, right up on through adulthood, I still see it. And the truth is that most of this stuff you got to figure out for yourself. The things that require, like, should I go this way or should I go that way? Things that are like, what's right for me?
Uh-huh.
Nobody else on the outside's got that answer for you. You gotta find that answer on the inside, and therefore, I find that like a big part of my life and what I'm doing, especially in that role and more of like the
Uh-huh.
coaching role, is helping people touch into their true self.
Well, that's a good one. Actually, that one really relates. I think you have this notion of decisions that are being made at the highest level in anything, right? In business, in politics, in sports, and it's not the case, right? There's an element of luck in everything, and you just got to objectively think and make the best decision. But definitely, no one has it figured out. And sometimes you get them right, and sometimes you don't, and you just got to
Yeah.
accept it and continue to move on.
Right.
That's a really good example. I like that.
Yeah.
All right, I
All
think I'm
right.
up. I'm going to ask you, if you could instantly master one skill or mindset shift, like what would you anchor to, and why would you anchor to it?
First thing that's coming up for me is mastering fear. I have seen in my own life, and particularly right now, where I'm really dialed into where am I living in ways that are not congruent, where the outside and the inside are misaligned. And when you trace back all of them, all the tentacles are tied to fear.
Now, was that like a shift and you had this aha moment?
I think for me, it's been as I've developed awareness at such a more deep level, what's happened is now I'm tuned into like, oh, I just told that little white lie, but actually what was underneath that was I was afraid of losing that person's approval, or
Yeah.
I was afraid of creating a conflict, and that's, rooted in this peacekeeping conflict avoidant energy that I have that I picked up from years ago. But like I'm noticing it on that really much more micro level.
Mhm.
And I'm constantly still caving into the fear, right? I'm not, this is my active practice right now.
Yeah, and it's not about it's acknowledgement of the fear that gets you through it, right? Instead of the suppression of the fear or the trying to avoid the fear, it's acknowledging it's there, and it's okay to not deal with it perfectly. But you have to acknowledge it. Totally, absolutely relate in kind of in a similar way. So kind of answering the question in my own, it is very similar to fear, but I've treated it in, I guess, a different way. So that's where the idea of which is pretty crazy for a lot of people when I talk to them, is cold plunging every morning. And, I get a lot of questions of, well, why do you do it? It seems very silly. Like, is it soreness? Like, what are the real reasons? And when I've kind of peeled back, the reason I do it is because it sucks. It absolutely sucks to wake up in the morning, it's dark outside, and you're getting in, 45-degree water. There's nothing enjoyable about that whatsoever. And I've been doing it now for a year, at least try to every morning. At a minimum, I'm probably doing it 5 days a week. And that fight or flight, that fear factor in the morning to get in, you're doing it, and you're introducing this insane amount of fight or flight. And through doing that, that has had a profound impact and a mindset shift. Is that also translates in a micro way into work and what you think you're capable of and what you really are capable of. And I think there's something profound for me specifically, that pushing myself every day to do something that's really, really hard actually is a great way to start the day, because everything else you go into after that can seem really, really easy, whether it's a really high stakes meeting with a board, or it's a high stakes customer meeting, like whatever that is, you feel you're groomed to deal with that situation in a way that I don't think a lot of people can, because you've gone through this regular sense of, instead of getting anxious in the moment, or instead of getting nervous, you acknowledge that that's happening, but you also feel very prepared and confident that you'll be able to work through that. And 3 minutes in the morning of doing that has had a transformative kind of outlook on how I want to treat the day and what I feel like I can conquer in any day, no matter how many curveballs get thrown at me.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's something so powerful about being, being so familiar with your physiological fear response to then not having it hijack you in the moment. All right, I got a quote for you. I don't know if you've heard this one. It's a little long, but I'm going to read it to you.
Okay.
And I just want you to react to it. So it's from Timothy Leary. He says, "Admit it, you aren't like them. You're not even close. You may occasionally dress yourself up as one of them, watch the same mindless television shows as they do, maybe even eat the same fast food sometimes. But it seems that the more you try to fit in, the more you feel like an outsider, watching the quote-unquote normal people as they go about their automatic existences. For every time you say club passwords like, 'Have a nice day,' and 'Weather's awful today, eh?' you yearn inside to say forbidden things like, 'Tell me something that makes you cry,' or 'What do you think deja vu is for?' Face it, you even want to talk to that girl in the elevator. But what if that girl in the elevator and the balding man who walks past your cubicle at work are thinking the same thing? Who knows what you might learn from taking a chance on conversation with the stranger? Everyone carries a piece of the puzzle. Nobody comes into your life by mere coincidence. Trust your instincts, do the unexpected, find the others."
Interesting. I anchor to thinking about how I show up in the world versus what's going on in my head. I think for a long time, and this has shifted more recently, just very self-involved and only really caring about that or my world, and not taking the time to see what's happening, seeing how unapproachable I can be in a work environment, seeing how unapproachable I can be in a social environment. It's not that I'm trying to project this arrogance or anything, but I think it can come off like that. So for me, I think I've made it a kind of a personal mission when you read through those things to not do that. Trying to make an acted effort to one, be authentic, right? The, hey, how you doing? But it's just words that you're spitting out, but actually understanding how someone's doing or asking them, and that being an authentic kind of piece of socialization, putting your kind of own self idea or self identity aside for a period of time to be present, to be authentic and be vulnerable, even with a stranger, can have some really profound impacts on how you feel about yourself, and certainly how that person's going to go about the rest of their day. That's where I go when I hear those kind of words. And you just want other people to be like that, because I certainly want to be treated like that, but I wasn't putting that out at all. So it's irony, right? So why would you expect someone to care about how you're feeling or be authentic about how your day's going when you're not putting that out? So you start putting it out, and you end up getting it back in some way. So that's kind of an interesting shift, I would say. More recently I've done, in a more intentional way, probably over the last year.
That's cool. That's really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked that question. I didn't necessarily realize it until it kind of kind of compounded and I got to the core of it. I know I do it. I intentionally want to do it. I know it makes me feel better, but saying it out loud, it was kind of an aha moment just now, like literally just now on the call. That yeah, I do that, and I do feel really good, and I'm sure that person feels really good when you're being genuine. So yeah, that was good.
Yeah, I feel like for me, something quite different came up. Then when I read this, it was a little bit of like the gauntlet being thrown down. I think
Mm,
I cave a lot into more like social anxieties. So it was maybe a little bit of like either an invitation or a shining, a mirror back at me of, hey, look at the ways in which that's what what I know that I'm on this path to do, connect more deeply with others, and yet look at all the ways in which I'm not
mm-hmm.
necessarily finding the others. And I will say, I think maybe part of what I've started to do more, even with this or putting out the audiobook that I put out, some of it too is also getting more comfortable with public sharing. It's already been amazing to me. Like I had these unbelievable experiences where after my most recent audiobook came out, I had people stop me who were like, "Hey, I heard about your book from so and so. Holy cow, this blew me away, or this touched me, or, I was struggling with this kind of thing." Sometimes it was people who I never would have expected that it
Mm-hmm.
would land for them. And so, by virtue of the same as what you just said,
Yeah.
but in a different format, not even in an interaction in person, the more you put out who you are to the world,
Mm-hmm.
the more you kind of attract those people and other people and connection at that level. So I think for me, I have a long ways to go to get better at sort of overcoming the more social anxiety types of things and getting out of the small talk and into the big talk faster with people.
And I think just to add on, I know for me and maybe for you as well, is stop caring so much about what people think about you. I think on the social anxiety side, or just, it doesn't matter how much you try to avoid it. Like there is just this always clicky crowd. Being so concerned about where you fit in that puzzle is a very toxic way to be in. One, you're not even being your authentic self. So you're not even putting out the real version of yourself to be accepted or unaccepted. And people get so worried and focused on that acceptance, that social acceptance. And it's a real thing you got to show up to, and you got to be your real self. And that's hard to do because no one wants to do that. They want to put on a mask and be something different and just get through it. And that's not helpful, because there might be really good connections you can make with people that are on journeys or going through different things, and you may not be able to unpack it in a short conversation, but you can probably learn a lot more about someone that's interesting stuff that you might enjoy, as opposed to a superficial conversation that has absolutely no weight. All right, cool. I think this one, it's very directed towards you. So I look at all the things that you have been working on over the last couple of years. Author, you're doing this podcast, a lot of like different speakings. So let's say that you were given the opportunity to do a TED Talk or some version of it, whether TED Talks are what they once were, but you get the opportunity to speak at the highest level, and you have an open itinerary of what you're passionate about and what message you want to get across. What would you choose, and why would you choose it?
My TED Talk would involve two components. I think I would be sharing probably the most challenging aspect of my own journey,
Mm-hmm.
which for me would be around coming to terms with the fact that I needed to quit drinking because it had crossed an invisible line and it was no longer okay for me to continue. And
Mm-hmm.
kind of grappling with what that meant and all the identity shifts and all the layers around that. And why that was so important was because that was symptomatic of a much deeper root cause, which was that I wasn't living a life that was true to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me that is 100% my mission now, is getting people on their true path. And I see it, that the message in so many different mental and physical illnesses has at its root that people are not living true to themselves. So that would be my TED Talk, would be like, I'm out there to get people to stop living the life that society tells them to live, and that other people tell them to live, and that they think they need to live because of their parents or because of their spouse or because of their friends or because of the neighbors and the Joneses and all the other things, the pressures that keep us not actually just like honoring who we really are.
Yep.
That's my TED Talk. How
That's
about
awesome.
you?
I hope to see it one day. I would definitely love to be in the audience for that one. In that same vein, I think for me, it would be a walkthrough of my journey, how I've overcome, different adversities, how I've dealt with either, kind of personal demons or professional adversity, what the output was. But I think for me, some stuff I alluded to earlier, which is this breaking down of the walls, this level of vulnerability that really drives growth, and like sharing that journey, and then this holistic approach to life. And I think sharing that personal story, I'd love to do that in a way that archetypes like those different kind of, and these happened over decades, right? There are all these different traumas that people go through. So depending on the severity of them and how much of an impact it has and how many people have tried to suppress these feelings, there's another side to it. And I think sharing that personal journey that I've gone through, I think would be the message I would want everyone to walk away from is, there's a path through it, and hopefully they walked away with an idea of how they could do it themselves.
All right, I got a question for you. Are there ways, or what ways are you redefining self-care for yourself beyond the way most people talk about it as more like surface level practices?
I've definitely, over the last, I would say 12 months, disrupted my traditional thought of self-care. For me specifically, self-care, and even more kind of intentionally around the last 6 months, has really been around real health. Not fitness, not exercise, but just getting to the core. So I've gone down a personal journey around really evaluating my blood work, understanding your intake in a way that isn't, macros. And it really all starts for me with gut health. And I totally, absolutely underestimated the importance of that. It's important, and it drives a number of things, but for me specifically, it actually drives everything. And that has changed a lot of my routine. So self-care includes red light therapy. It includes steam showers and saunas and cold plunges, my regular fitness routine, a very strict anti-inflammatory diet, certain breaks throughout the day, learning when I need to do a protocol, non-sleep deep rest, and just layering in all this stuff that you've learned and picked up over time to round yourself out to just have the energy that you've always craved. And a lot of it started for me with, I just didn't have the energy. I've got 3 boys, and I didn't have the energy to keep up with them. And this is the first time I've actually seen results that I've always desired.
How do you actually find the time?
I mean, you just, like anything else, you make the time because it's a priority. The question I get the most around this kind of wellness journey is how do you eat? Because the world of processed foods and bad foods, it's everywhere, right? So you have to learn what you're kind of sensitive to. So I have an immune disease called Hashimoto. So, going through that, I'm very conscious of what foods I eat that'll flare up. When I look at food, I don't look at food and whether or not how good it's going to taste, whether I'm going to a restaurant or we're grocery shopping. I look at foods now, my mindset has shifted. I look at foods now and I think, how is it going to make me feel later in the day, tomorrow, and the next day? Yeah. And it's a paradox, right? Most people will limp through it if it's not bad enough.
Yeah.
You want to almost, for me, it had to get so bad that I had to take the intervention. Had it stayed at this middle point, you probably try to find things to tweak your way through it and not get to the root cause. So I'm actually very grateful that it got to a point where, this was, something I had to address and not try to hide behind. But it had to get really bad. All right, so I've got, this one's kind of high level. But how has the notion and idea of success changed for you?
Got a real fresh, hot off the presses perspective on this because I'll say there's this concept in Jungian psychology, like Carl Jung talks about the unlived life. Every choice you make in life, you're closing doors, you know?
Mm,
Okay, I chose to go in this way, and therefore that means I'm not this way. I'm married, therefore I'm not single. I have kids, therefore I'm not living the life of somebody who doesn't have kids. I chose to
mhm,
be a doctor, therefore I'm not a whatever. And yet you have all these things in you. Some of them are really important to you, important to your psyche or your soul or whatever language resonates with you. So for me, I think that the way that I've reframed success is around recognizing those soul imperatives and finding a way to integrate them into my life. And why I say that's so hot off the presses is because I'm starting to come to some clarity about some real things that are high priority for me that are not possible to exercise at this moment in time. And I'll just give one example, which is like simplicity, like a simple life. Like I'm probably one of the people in my life, one of the only people who I know. I don't come up across many people who enjoy solitude and silence and time in nature and meditation retreats and things like that to the extent that I do. And
mhm.
so having a very busy, active life with the soccer practices and the, full-time jobs and the, all that stuff, yet I know that I crave that simplicity, that just
Mhm.
like chop wood, carry water. And so how can I build a more successful life within a paradigm, within my current present experience that still honors that need for simplicity and space and solitude. And that's also, I think, the path I'm on to redefining success because I think
Uh-huh.
I now see that a lot of the other things that I was pursuing, they just don't actually matter to the extent that I thought that they did. And therefore, there's a renegotiation of priorities that's happening in my life right now. And
Mhm.
that's probably going to be a process that I'm in for some time.
That's awesome.
All right,
Yeah, that's
let's hear.
that's really good. I knew you were gonna have a great answer. That's why I asked that question because it's such a loaded question, and it's got so many traditional thoughts around success. I mean, I think that's kind of where my brain went to answer the question. Is I'll tell you what it's not, and the first thing it's not is like wealth. It's not title. And for a long period of my life, it was all about that, craving that and getting to that next plateau and that filling some void that it doesn't fill. And it doesn't mean you can have an incredible career doing things, but it doesn't fill the void. You have to go through it to experience it and then understand it and then in hindsight look at it, but it's not that. So for me, success, when the word success, I immediately think around being a father and a husband instantly. Like that's up here and everything else is underneath it. And I think being a father and that does it tends to change your kind of priorities in some way. But for me, like that, like being the absolute best version I can be for them, my wife and my sons, that's success. And by being that best version, certainly it comes with being able to provide and do all these things 100%. But like reflecting on how I want to raise them and the life I want them to have, the core values, the ideas, all of the missteps that I've taken to set them up to be, successful in their own way, whatever however they define it. Like that's where my mind goes. And I kind of think back to, maybe 10 years ago, like I would not have answered that. And I think that's an interesting shift of what success is. And I don't think it has changed. I actually believe it's accelerated my ability to go through corporate America. It's accelerated my ability to be successful in, sales careers because you find your why in a different way. And if you're chasing and trying to accomplish something very meaningful, which that is for me, all the stakes become different. And it's not, these moments in time, it's an evolution. So that to me has definitely been an aha moment, and certainly like what I anchor to, and success is all around. It's all around family.